Before he became the calm, wise sheriff of Mayberry, he was just Andy from a small town in North Carolina, a boy with big dreams and a simple life. His voice would one day comfort millions, but behind that voice was a story full of struggle, pain, and quiet strength. This is not just the story of a TV legend, it's the story of a man who lost so much, yet still chose to smile. Before we dive into video, please subscribe our channel. Born on June 1st, 1926, in the small town of Mount Airy, North Carolina, Andy Samuel Griffith was the only child of Carl Lee and Geneva Griffith. His father worked as a carpenter, but times were hard during the Great Depression, and the family lived in deep poverty. They couldn't even afford a home when Andy was born. He spent his early years living with relatives until his parents saved enough for a small house. This humble beginning shaped his sense of humor, his empathy, and the values he'd later bring to life on television. Andy was a quiet, observant child. He didn't have many friends, and he was often teased for being poor. But he found comfort in music, especially gospel and swing. At just 9 years old, he received a trombone as a gift, and that instrument opened up a world of expression he had never known. Soon, his talent began to show. His deep love for performance only grew stronger through church music and school plays. Life at home was simple but full of love. His parents, though financially struggling, did their best to provide Andy with a stable and nurturing environment. They encouraged him to pursue his interests, especially when it came to storytelling and music, two things that would define his future. After high school, Andy attended the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, initially to study to be a preacher, but fate had other plans. It was here that his comedic talent truly began to shine. He joined a college drama group and performed in dozens of plays. His charm, southern wit, and timing made him stand out. While others saw acting as a hobby, Andy felt it in his bones this was his calling. This small-town boy with a slow drawl and a big heart was about to step onto a stage far bigger than he had ever imagined. But the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. It would test his patience, his relationships, and his soul. The early career path that led Andy from the dusty roads of Mount Airy to the bright lights of fame. But before the spotlight came rejection, heartbreak, and a strange twist of fate. After college, Andy Griffith stood at a crossroads. He had a music degree in hand, a head full of dreams, and not much else. He'd spent years honing his talents, in front of small college audiences, but the world beyond Mount Airy was a different beast. The idea of becoming a full-time entertainer seemed far-fetched. Yet, Andy wasn't one to back down from a challenge. In the late 1940s, he began his professional life as a high school music teacher in Goldsboro, North Carolina. But he quickly realized that teaching wasn't enough. The stage kept calling. He found a way to balance both, teaching by day and performing at local events and church groups by night. It was a grind, but it gave him room to grow, sharpen his skills, and build confidence in front of live audiences. Andy's big break didn't come from Hollywood. It came from a comedy monologue he created in 1953 titled, "What It Was Football." A humorous piece told from the perspective of a confused country preacher attending his first football game. The monologue spread like wildfire. Radio stations began playing it. Audiences loved it. Before long, it was picked up by Capitol Records and sold over 800,000 copies. Andy Griffith had gone national, but he still wasn't a household name. Riding the wave of that success, Andy began appearing on popular television shows like The Ed Sullivan Show and The Steve Allen Show. He wasn't flashy, and he didn't have the looks of a leading man, but he had something rarer: authenticity. When Andy talked, people listened. When he smiled, you believed him. His first major acting role came in 1955, in the teleplay No Time for Sergeants, where he played a naive but lovable Air Force recruit named Will Stockdale. It struck a chord with audiences and later turned into a Broadway hit and a feature film. Suddenly, producers saw his range. He wasn't just a comic voice, he was a true actor. But success brought new challenges. Andy was thrust into an industry that didn't quite understand his humble roots. Hollywood was loud, fast, and unforgiving. He struggled with self-doubt, often feeling out of place among the polished actors and scripted smiles. He missed the simplicity of North Carolina. The quiet streets, the front porches, the people who knew him by name. In the midst of this new fame, Andy also had to navigate his personal life. He married Barbara Edwards in 1949, and the two tried to maintain a family life amidst growing pressure and frequent travel. It wasn't easy. Andy's work consumed most of his time, and the cracks in his marriage would eventually show. But, for now, he focused on building his name, one honest performance at a time. Andy finally finds the role that will define his legacy forever. But with fame comes personal sacrifices he never expected. By the early 1960s, Andy Griffith had earned respect in the industry, but he hadn't yet achieved the kind of fame that made people stop on the street. That all changed in 1960, when he was offered a role that would not only define his career, but also redefine American television. CBS approached Andy to play the lead in a new show set in a sleepy southern town. A sheriff without a gun, in a town without real crime. The Andy Griffith Show was born. Andy didn't just act in the show, he shaped it. The fictional town of Mayberry was loosely based on his real-life hometown of Mount Airy. The show's easy pace, small-town values, and gentle humor offered a stark contrast to the political and social unrest bubbling across America at the time. Audiences were drawn to the calm. They found comfort in Sheriff Andy Taylor, a widower, father, and moral compass, who ruled not with force, but with reason, humor, and heart. The chemistry between the cast members helped the show become an instant classic. Ron Howard, who played young Opie, looked up to Andy both on and off screen. Don Knotts, as the bumbling but lovable Deputy Barney Fife, won 5 Emmy Awards for his performance. Yet, it was Andy's steady presence that held the whole thing together. He rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. His calm southern drawl, wise eyes, and gentle wit were enough to guide the show through 8 wildly successful seasons. Behind the scenes, however, Andy's life wasn't as peaceful. Fame brought pressure. The long filming schedules, endless interviews, and the public's growing curiosity about his private life took a toll. His marriage to Barbara Edwards began to unravel. The strain of balancing stardom with fatherhood to adopted children Dixie and Sam wasn't easy. Andy often felt torn between his duty as a public figure and his role as a father and husband. Still, the Andy Griffith Show soared. At its peak, it was one of the most watched shows on television. In its final season, 1968, it ended as the #1 show in America, a rare feat. Andy chose to walk away at the top. He didn't want to stretch the show thin. In his eyes, Mayberry had said what it needed to say, but his career was far from over. As Andy stepped away from the sheriff's badge, he carried with him both the pride of creating a cultural touchstone and the heavy burden of personal sacrifice. The man who gave America Mayberry was now searching for balance in his own life. Fame fades, relationships fracture, and Andy faces the greatest challenges of his personal life behind the spotlight. While Andy Griffith's public image was one of warmth and steadiness, his personal life told a different story, one shaped by heartache, distance, and decisions that would haunt him for years. Behind the beloved Sheriff Taylor was a man quietly struggling to keep his family from slipping through his fingers. Andy married Barbara Edwards in 1949, long before his rise to fame. She was a fellow performer, talented, poised, and deeply devoted in those early years. They adopted 2 children, a daughter Dixie and a son Sam. For a while, it felt like a perfect family. But as Andy's star rose, the family began to feel the weight of fame. The demands of the Andy Griffith Show were intense. Between writing, acting, and producing, Andy was rarely home. When he wasn't filming, he was touring or attending events. Barbara, left to raise the children mostly alone, grew frustrated. The warmth between them began to cool. What had started as a shared dream slowly became a quiet divide. Friends close to the family noticed a change. Andy, once full of humor and music, became distant at home. He was still kind, still present when he could be, but the emotional connection was fading. Fame, as it often does, had taken its toll not just on Andy, but on the people who loved him most. In 1972, after 23 years of marriage, Andy and Barbara divorced. It was a quiet, painful end to a once beautiful chapter. Andy rarely spoke about it publicly, but those close to him knew the separation left him hollow. He carried the guilt of not being there, of missing birthdays, school plays, and the ordinary moments that build a family. After the divorce, Andy found comfort in solitude for a while. He retreated to his home in North Carolina, away from the noise. But love came again, unexpectedly. In 1973, he married Greek actress Selika Kasuto. Their relationship was more private, more guarded. While they shared nearly a decade together, it didn't last. They divorced in 1981, no children, no dramatic headlines. Just another quiet heartbreak in the life of a man who gave so much to the world and struggled to hold on to the ones closest to him. His third and final marriage came years later, in 1983, to Cindy Knight, a former school teacher and actress whom Andy met while filming. She brought peace into his life. She stood by him during his health battles in later years, becoming his rock when the world slowly started to forget Mayberry. But perhaps the deepest pain of Andy's life came not from divorce, but from loss. Tragic death shakes Andy to his core, and old controversies resurface as he struggles with personal demons far from the public eye. As the lights dimmed on the Andy Griffith Show and Andy moved into a quieter phase of life, the real battles began. Not on set, but within himself. For decades, he had carried the weight of being America's favorite sheriff, the symbol of decency and kindness. But even Mayberry's calmest voice could not escape the storms life had in store. The most devastating blow came from within his own family, his son, Sam Griffith. Adopted as a baby, Sam had grown up in the long shadow of a famous father. While Andy was beloved by millions, Sam struggled to find his place in the world. Friends and family said he felt invisible, like he was always competing with a public image that was too perfect to touch. As Sam entered adulthood, trouble followed. He battled alcohol addiction and had repeated run-ins with the law, DUI arrests, fights, and brushes with violence. Andy, now older and deeply private, tried to keep the pain away from the press, but there were whispers. Some said he distanced himself from Sam. Others believed he tried everything to help, but failed. The truth, as always, was more complicated. In 1996, Sam Griffith was found dead at just 38 years old. The cause was unknown, though substance abuse was suspected. Andy was shattered. He never publicly addressed the details, but those closest to him saw the change. The grief was permanent. The man who had once brought laughter into American homes now walked through his own in silence. He had lost a son, not just in death, but long before. This wasn't the only pain Andy endured. Despite his clean, gentle persona, he was not without controversy. Some crew members from his earlier shows described him as controlling and moody behind the scenes. Don Knotts, his close friend and co-star, had reportedly left the show after tensions flared between them, though the two reconciled later in life. Still, Andy's perfectionism, his struggle with fame, and his private temperament painted a more complex picture than what audiences saw each week. In the 1980s, Andy attempted a comeback with the courtroom drama Matlock, where he played a wise, sharp Southern lawyer. The role brought him back into the spotlight and reminded fans of his range and charisma. But by then, his health was declining. Andy battled Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that briefly paralyzed him in the 1980s, and later, heart problems that would persist into his final years. Yet, through every setback, Andy never lost his quiet dignity. He never lashed out publicly, never blamed others. He simply kept going, one foot in front of the other, holding tight to the values that had carried him since his childhood. A final look at Andy's lasting legacy, his final days, and the surprising details behind his hidden net worth and mysterious death. In the twilight of his life, Andy Griffith retreated from the spotlight, not in bitterness, but in quiet reflection. He had done what few ever could, shaped an entire generation's memory of comfort, decency, and small-town simplicity. But even as the cameras stopped rolling, his influence only grew. His return to television in the 1980s with Matlock was more than a comeback. It was a reinvention. As Ben Matlock, a sharp-witted criminal defense lawyer in a gray suit with a Southern charm, Andy connected with a whole new audience. The show was a hit, running for 9 seasons and cementing Griffith's reputation as more than just a one-role wonder. He was a master storyteller, able to shift from comedy to drama with grace. Off-screen, Andy was becoming more reclusive. He spent most of his later years on Roanoke Island in North Carolina, far from the glamour of Hollywood. He lived in a beautiful waterfront estate, surrounded by the calm he had longed for. There, he played his beloved guitar, walked along the shore, and cherished time with his wife, Cindy Knight, who remained by his side until the very end. Despite his fame, Andy never seemed consumed by money. In fact, few people knew the true extent of his wealth. At the time of his passing in 2012, estimates placed his net worth at around $60 million. much of it quietly earned from decades of smart investments, royalties, and the massive syndication. Success of The Andy Griffith Show and Matlock. Andy never flaunted it. He never needed to. But even his death was a mystery in itself. On July 3, 2012, Andy Griffith passed away at his coastal home at the age of 86. What shocked fans wasn't just the loss, it was how quickly he was buried. Within hours of his death, he was laid to rest in a private ceremony on the very land he loved. No press, no public funeral, just a quiet goodbye, exactly as he had lived. Tributes poured in from around the world. Barack Obama called him a beloved icon, and millions mourned the loss of the man who had given them laughter, wisdom, and peace during some of America's most turbulent times. His former co-stars, including Ron Howard, shared tearful tributes, calling him not only a mentor, but a second father. But Andy Griffith's greatest legacy wasn't just in the roles he played, it was in the values he represented. Humility, kindness, and quiet strength. He made America feel like home. In a world growing louder and faster, Andy reminded us of the power in slowing down, listening, and doing what's right. Mayberry may have been fiction, but Andy Griffith made it feel real, and in doing so, gave us something eternal.